Welcome to a quick video on how to install Drupal Commerce using Lando. It should be pretty simple. In the past, we have installed using the documentation, and from there you can learn about the installation guide, and it will walk you through what we've done in a previous video. What I wanted to show you in this particular video is to use a new tool that is using Drupal Commerce and embraces this idea of Composer. And Composer lets you make the decisions on what you want to use to build your site. In the past, Commerce Kickstart has been one of the most popular Drupal distributions, and for good reason, because it made life really easy. The idea with commercekickstart.com is that it actually takes it up a notch and gives you a little bit more control, like Composer gives you control. So when you go to commercekickstart.com, which is where I recommend you go, you can pick which region you're going to be in. We're just going to stay with international. You can select a distribution. We're going to add more distributions in the future. So the idea is that you can use something that maybe Acro has produced, or something that has been produced by the community or other companies that would be really helpful for your particular use case, or perhaps for you to evaluate Drupal Commerce. So being able to select these different options is really going to help you get things started in the right way. You can go ahead and select a payment option. We'll just go with PayPal because it's pretty obvious. Shipping, we'll go with flat rate. I actually prefer flat rate and recommend flat rate for everybody. And custom taxes are what basically come installed. We're going to start integrating additional tax modules out there, and these are all, what we're doing is we're essentially building a composer.json file in a very user-friendly way. And then you can choose various catalog options, different kinds of modules that might help you with that. I'm going to go with Apache Solar, and we'll throw in wishlist there as well. Now, as of right now, just selecting these things will bring in the modules. In the future, we're gonna try to add an option, hopefully. Since we're talking about it, we're gonna try to add an option where you can have it set up kind of a demo install, so that you can actually see how these things work as well. And at the very bottom here, if you click download, what it'll do is it gives you a really simple tar.gz, and generally speaking, you can uncompress that using whatever software you want. And once you've opened it up, it will give you a README file, a scripts folder, which includes a script handler and a composer.json that's specific to all of the options you selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this as kind of my starting point for the site. And I've created a folder, put it over here so it's really easy to get to, but putting this up on GitHub called Install Commerce Lando. And we'll just go ahead and replace everything. So that's the same thing, that it's basically the same directory that we just downloaded. And if you go to github.com/acromedia/ I don't know, was it install? Yeah, it was install Commerce Lando. That was it. And so the only thing I've committed to right now is the readme.md. As we go through here, though, you'll be able to see kind of the progression of commits that we're doing. So I've opened up PHP Storm. This is, let's see, 2018-1 PHP Storm. It's pretty standard. I'm using the ZSH bash. So that's, or bash-like thing. I'm not sure what it's actually called. Scripting environment. And over here on the left, this is my repository. So there's really nothing going on. Just a composer.json and a readme.md. The first thing we're going to want you to do, or I would recommend you do, is you type in Lando and then Drupal in Google, and you'll dive right into the fantastic Lando documentation. Lando is a wrapper or a technology built around Docker to make Docker easier. And what Docker does is it runs a very thin client. It tries to reuse your computer's resources to build an entirely new virtualized system, which is just a really confusing way of saying it can run about any technology, and Lando makes it really, really easy to set up a website and a database on your system without any trouble, and it works across all the different computer systems. That's why I actually recommend using it. In past installation videos, I've talked about, you're going to have to figure this out on your own. It depends on what system you're using. Lando and Docker make it possible to just install it and then kind of abstract what operating system you're on. You don't have to worry about it as much. So Lando, and getting started with Drupal 8, the first thing you'll need to do is install Lando, and various operating system requirements. Note, for the Windows users, you do have to have the Pro Plus, so be aware of that. And it apparently requires Hyper-V. Pretty small requirements on the hardware side of things, and Docker has various requirements as well, so you should probably read through those, go through what they have, pre-flight checks, and then ultimately you just have a couple of simple instructions. So for Mac, you're going to download the DMG, or you could use Homebrew. For Windows, there is an exe. And for Linux, it has 4 steps here, which look pretty straightforward. If you go to the GitHub link that it lists there are a number of releases based on what you might need. And for Mac users, it's really easy. You just download the DMG. It installs Docker for you. It installs everything that you need for Lando to work. And if you already have Docker installed, something like that, it doesn't matter. It understands how to work with it. So we have the Lando installed. I've already got it pre-installed here. And the first step that we're going to do actually is composer install. Now, by running composer install, what that's going to do is it's going to use composer to read this list that was just downloaded for commercekickstart.com. And this list is usually and generally speaking going to be the most up-to-date software that you need to work with commerce and with the different types of selections that you selected there on the homepage. So like I selected database searching in Solr, so it's going to bring in search API, that kind of thing. Swift Mailer is one of those requirements that Drupal Commerce has, and so commercekickstart.com is just going to understand all of the requirements, add everything that it can find. PayPal was something I selected, shipping, wish list, and various things that Composer requires for your Drupal core to stay up to date. That's all going to get added here to the JSON file. Now, you can actually modify this if you want, and you should, as you're building your site, you should use Composer to do all of the work as much as possible. But once Composer starts to read everything, it's just going to start loading all of these things. Now, obviously, I loaded this prior to the video, so it's going to go pretty fast. But it does have a lot of different dependencies that it's pulling in from Symfony, Drupal dependencies, making sure that all of the testing environments still work. So there's a number of dev-related dependencies here that we're bringing in that you don't necessarily need to run your website, but you do if you're going to build a website. Okay, so it's just finishing up here now, and what it's done is it's run through Composer, gotten all the dependencies, and we've been given a complete install of what that composer.json YAML or JSON file suggested. So it brought in Drupal core, it brought in a bunch of contrib modules. So we have, let's make this a little smaller here. So we have address, commerce, the PayPal module that I selected, and all of the module dependencies. And this is best practice for Drupal 8. You have a contrib folder, and then if you're going to create custom modules, you put a custom folder inside the modules file directly. Now everything's red here because we're using Git. And if I write git status, it's gonna try to add everything I just did. Now I recommend you go to GitHub/Drupal Commerce. Is it Commerce? Something like that. Commerce base. I'm never gonna remember it off the top of my head. Yeah, we'll do this. Inside the repository that is, it's called project base. So it's Drupal Commerce /project base. There is a git ignore that's really, really generic and a good idea to go ahead and throw up there for your project. So we'll just go ahead and copy that and create a new file. Git ignore. And we will paste that. What it's only going to add is the pieces of this module or of the install that you can't build as a part of the build process. And that gives us the ability to lower the amount of code that we're committing to Git, but also the ability to potentially track those pieces that we might care about, like the git commit result of running Composer install. Okay. So Composer install has run. The next thing we want to do is we want to run Lando init. So Lando init. There we go. Now Lando init is going to, it's part of the documentation that I was on earlier. When you go to the Drupal 8 installation requirements, it will work you through a couple of commands that you need to run. And what it does is it creates a .lando.yaml file, which will, it's in Lando terms, give you a recipe. So we could go with a custom recipe here. I'm going to choose a Drupal 8 recipe. And where is your relative to the init destination? The web root that our composer created for us was called web. That's where Drupal is installed and all of the modules are installed. So we'll do that. And what do you want to call this app? My Lando app, we're just going to call it Commerce Kickstart. Sure. Name, a location, the recipe, and the doc. So it's generated the Lando YAML file, which we'll pull up here, which includes just the 4 things that it configured. And that's all it needs because that recipe gives it all of the rest of the resources that it needs to build. So of course, if you create your own recipe, there's a lot more you can change. All right, so once we've added those 2 things, we'll just do another git status. Let's add the git ignore, the readme, and Lando. Git commit, result of running Lando init. Okay. Now we need to run Lando start. And what Lando start will do is it will actually create a website on your local environment using Docker, and you'll be able to start using your Drupal site pretty quickly. The first time it runs, sometimes it can take a little while to download. It has to create the database server and the app server. Okay, so it's finished. And like I said, this is probably the best part of Lando. It just gives you all of these links that you can go ahead and immediately follow to install your site. One of the really cool things I like about it, and I was surprised when I started preparing for this, was this HTTPS actually works. And if anybody's tried to make HTTPS work on your local website, it's kind of hard, and that's actually a really important thing for Drupal Commerce, because you want to test how your commerce site works inside a secure environment. So we'll go ahead and try to access it with a secure environment. Now, of course, it's a self-signed certificate, so you're going to end up getting a what's called a privacy error. It's only a privacy error because it doesn't believe that this self-signed certificate is secure. But it's still going to act when you click on advanced and proceed. It's still going to act as if it were secure. So you can still test things even though the browser itself doesn't quite believe that it's secure. So now we're just waiting for my local website to catch up to everything I'm doing, including screen recording. So it's probably a little bit slower than the average install here. But so we're at the install screen, which is probably where I will cut, and then I'll come back as soon as the thing has been actually installed. Here we have the database configuration. This is actually a pretty important step, and one that'll be like, well, I don't know where my database is, and I don't know how to access it because I'm in some weird Lando world here. And that's fine. If you go back to your terminal, you should be able to run Lando info, and it will give you all of the details you need to access the database. There it is. So we have at the top here we have the app server. That's what's running PHP and Nginx, or it looks like it's using Apache here out of the box. And then with the location of your INI for PHP, the URLs that it gave us earlier. What we really want to know though is how do we get to the Drupal to the database. So we have a user, a password, and a database name all made up for us, so Drupal 8 all the way through. And this is really important. The internal connection is what you care about, and it's called database, and it's at port 3306. So Drupal 8 is what all of these are. And you have to click advanced options, and where it says localhost, it will now be database. Port number, ignore table prefix, click save and continue. And this is where we will really cut and wait until the installation has completed, because it can take a little while. And this is where the site can be configured when you're installing it. So we'll just call this Commerce Kickstart, and we'll go with test at test.com, admin, very weak password. I recommend you keep this checked for updates automatically because that helps us with statistics. And I also recommend you set the default time zone, particularly if you're using Drupal Commerce for point of sale or other types of reporting. If your time zone is UTC by default, then the time zone can mess with your reporting. It can say, for example, something happened yesterday when it happened in the middle of the day today. UTC can be very, very different from your actual time zone. So for reporting purposes, I recommend that you can change it in the future, and it will fix the reporting. So not all is not lost if you change time zones, for example. And here we have a Commerce Kickstart site built from commercekickstart.com, running on Lando. Some of the things you can do with it is you can just go into Commerce here, inside the configuration, and go ahead and create a store, create a currency, and then you can start to create your product types and everything else that you'll need to start running your store and start selling things. So lots of information here. Good luck, Godspeed. When you are done with your store, for whatever reason, once you're done evaluating or working on it, I recommend you go back into your command line and type in Lando stop. And Lando stop is essentially the same as Docker compose down or Docker down. It will turn off all the different services that are running your test environment. Thank you for watching.